Hey beautiful, have you considered subscribing to our channel? Help us reach our goal of 1,000 subscribers.
It started with a faint, almost imperceptible buzz, like the hum of a dying wasp trapped behind a wall. I sat upright in bed, heart thumping, eyes straining in the dark. My room was bathed in the soft, eerie glow of my custom-built gaming rig's LED lights. Except they were flickering again. Not tonight. I slid off the bed, cold hardwood biting into my feet. The buzz was louder now, low and menacing, like a warning growl vibrating through the drywall. I followed it into the hallway, past the bathroom, and into the living room where the overhead lights flickered in protest. Then dimmed. My heart sank. That was the third time this week. Third night of interrupted sleep. Third time the surge had threatened my livelihood. See, I work from home, IT troubleshooting, freelance consulting, a little bit of coding on the side. My setup is everything. The power surges weren't just inconvenient, they were dangerous. Last month, one nearly fried my backup server. The only thing more unstable than my Wi-Fi was the power grid running through this duplex. Or so I thought. I opened the window. The air outside was thick with the smell of ozone and faintly, plastic? That burnt, synthetic tang made my stomach twist. Then I saw her. There she was again. Karen. She was parked like royalty on her rickety plastic chair, hair in oversized curlers, sipping something fizzy through a chewed-up straw. And right beside her, plugged directly into the outdoor shared outlet that was wired through my side of the duplex, was her monstrous electric scooter. The charging light blinked greedily, gulping electricity like it was free. Because to her it was. I clenched the windowsill. The audacity. I had warned her before, kindly even. We'd only been neighbors for 6 months, and in that time she had managed to single-handedly destabilize my electricity and my sanity. But this was blatant theft. Entitled, arrogant, and, somehow, entirely smug about it. Morning came faster than expected. The buzz haunted me in my sleep if I even slept at all. At 10 a.m., coffee in hand, I crossed the small gravel path separating our halves of the duplex. Her side was a garden of chaos, half-dead potted plants, cracked flamingo statues, and the faint sound of some true crime podcast echoing from an open window. I knocked. A few moments passed before the door creaked open. Karen stood in the doorway, wearing a hot pink bathrobe and mismatched slippers, looking me up and down as if I was the inconvenience. "Yes?" she asked, eyebrows already raised. "Hey, sorry to bother you," I began carefully. "It's about your scooter. The outdoor outlet? It's causing some major power issues in my place." She sipped from her Diet Coke can, her eyes glassy. "I think your scooter's pulling too much current. I've had power dips, brownouts even. It's getting dangerous. One more spike and I could lose a hard drive." She blinked once. Twice. "I pay rent. I charge my scooter. It's an outlet. That's what it's for. But it's a shared outlet. And it's wired through my breaker. I've seen the blueprint." She scoffed. "Then maybe your setup's just garbage. Get a surge protector or something. You tech guys love your gadgets, right?" My jaw clenched, but I kept my tone even. "I just need you to stop charging it there. Please. Find another outlet or talk to the landlord about getting one installed on your side." Karen smiled, thin, tight-lipped, like a snake unhinging its jaw. "I'll think about it," she said, and then closed the door in my face. That was the first slap. The second came a few hours later when I saw her post in the neighborhood Facebook group. "Imagine crying over electricity like it's the apocalypse. My scooter stays charged, baby. High voltage winking face #techboys mad again." Dozens of laughing reacts. A few memes popped up. Someone even photoshopped a crying cartoon guy clutching a power cord. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't need to be. I felt like a joke. The problem wasn't just that she was inconsiderate, it was that she enjoyed being inconsiderate. She relished the attention, the mockery, the petty jabs. I was the guy next door who just wanted quiet nights and stable voltage, and to her, that made me the enemy. I tried calling the landlord. Left a voicemail. Then an email. Then a second. Nothing. I posted my own message in the Facebook group, polite, detailed, trying to sound reasonable. I laid out the dangers of overloading a residential circuit, the cost of fried electronics, the legal gray area of shared utilities. Karen replied with a gif of someone dramatically fainting. Then she posted again. "If your lights can't handle a scooter, maybe go live in a tent faced with tears of joy high voltage." This time I didn't even try to reply. That night, as I sat at my desk staring at the blinking cursor on an empty screen, I felt it, power dip, flicker, a familiar hum. My monitor went black for a second, then rebooted. Unsaved work. Gone. I pushed my chair back, heart pounding. I walked to the wall, pressed my hand against the drywall. It was faintly warm. I didn't sleep. Not properly. The next day I stood in the hardware store, staring at a display of surge protectors and outlet testers. Nothing would stop the drain unless the source was cut. And the source was Karen, who clearly wasn't going to stop anytime soon. As I walked home, the sun setting behind a thick line of tangled power cables overhead, something shifted in me. A slow, simmering certainty. She wasn't going to stop. So maybe it was time I stopped playing nice. I looked at her side of the yard as I passed. Scooter charging, porch light on, Karen laughing on a FaceTime call with someone, her voice loud and echoing across the property. She thought she'd won. And that's when the first spark of an idea flickered in the back of my mind. Small, harmless. Just a flicker. But flickers can turn into wildfires. The next surge didn't just flicker the lights, it nearly took out my entire setup. I just booted into a client-server interface, live on a troubleshooting call with their CFO, when the screen stuttered, blinked twice and went dark. My UPS backup kicked in too late. Everything froze. The client's voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by silence and then the dreaded disconnect chime. I stared at the screen in disbelief, heart sinking, bow rising. That call was supposed to secure my retainer for the quarter. Gone. Just like that. I stood up slowly, every nerve in my body buzzing with frustration. Through the window, the cause of my disaster was humming along happily. Karen's scooter charger blinked its greedy little green light, plugged firmly into the same outlet it had always been. She was reclining on her deck like she owned the block, phone in one hand, iced tea in the other, music blaring from a tinny Bluetooth speaker. I stepped outside, jaw tight, every step across the gravel path deliberate. She saw me coming but didn't bother sitting up. "You blew out my entire workstation," I said, barely keeping my voice level. She turned lazily, eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. "I did what now?" "You're overloading the shared circuit again." I was mid-client. The power dipped and my system crashed. "This isn't a game, Karen. This is my job." She chuckled, stretched her legs. "Maybe don't rely on 2002 wiring, genius." "You've been told." Repeatedly. I've asked nicely. I've explained the risks. "You're siphoning power and putting my setup, held the whole duplex, at risk." She took a slow sip of her tea, then stood up, clearly enjoying herself. "What are you going to do? Call the power police? Call the city? The landlord? Anyone? This has to stop." Karen smirked. "Good luck with that. I talked to the landlord last week. Said you've been overreacting. He's not doing anything." That wasn't just gall, it was strategy. She'd gotten ahead of me. Painted me as the cranky, paranoid neighbor. And from the way she waved to old Mrs. Wexler watering her roses next door, I could tell her charm offensive had already worked. I stood there, boiling, knowing I was on the edge of doing something I might regret. Karen leaned in close enough that I caught a whiff of coconut lotion and smug superiority. "You know, if your little wires can't handle a scooter, maybe you should get out of the tech game. Or move." Then she winked. And walked inside. Later that day, a new post hit the Facebook group. A photo of her scooter with the caption, "Back on the charge, baby. Can't stop, won't stop. Nail polish high voltage hashtag juiced up and unbothered." The comments rolled in. "Queen behavior. She's so real for this. Imagine being mad at someone else for using electricity, lol." I didn't even recognize some of the commenters, but their sarcasm stung just the same. One guy tagged me directly with a laughing emoji and said, "This you?" I didn't respond. But something inside me cracked. I spent the next 2 days trying to get help. Official help. I contacted the city inspector. They told me to call the electric company. The electric company told me to call my landlord. The landlord, when I finally got him on the phone, sighed and said, "Jake, buddy, you gotta work this out neighbor to neighbor. I'm not getting in the middle of a pissing match. This isn't a neighbor dispute. This is an electrical hazard. Then call an electrician. I'm not paying out of pocket to fix her abuse of the circuit. Then maybe just unplug her scooter." He hung up. I did consider it, unplugging the scooter myself. But that crossed a line. I wasn't reckless, and I sure as hell wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of catching me in the act and playing the victim. That's how people like Karen worked. They pushed until you pushed back, then cried foul louder than you ever could. So instead, I started researching. My background wasn't just in software. Back in college, I had taken a few courses in electrical systems, even helped install solar arrays for extra credit. I wasn't a licensed electrician, but I knew enough to be dangerous. Or rather, smart. At first, it was just idle reading. Circuit thresholds, residential load capacities, how different chargers draw power over time. But the deeper I went, the more I saw a pattern in how her scooter behaved. It didn't pull max power right away. It ramped up and then, right near full charge, it spiked, likely triggering the surge that took out my system. That was when the idea hit me. Not a malicious one. Not illegal. Just corrective. A system that responds to stress. A defense mechanism. What if I could wire the outlet to detect that spike, and trip the circuit in a way that only affected her? Something subtle. Something reactive. Not sabotage. Just consequences. I spent hours drawing out plans, watching tutorials, lurking in forums. It wouldn't be easy. I'd need access to the shared breaker box. I'd need to be precise. But it was possible. More than possible. I stood in my kitchen that evening, lights low, laptop open to a forum thread titled *, Custom Surge Traps for Reversing Load Drain. *. My hands trembled, not from fear but anticipation. Because this time, I wasn't just going to wait for Karen to cross another line. I was going to draw one. And wire it to bite back. 3 days later, my plan was ready. It had taken a dozen late-night trips to the garage, several discreet purchases from the hardware store, and a carefully worded favor from my old college buddy, Marcus, an actual electrician who owed me one. He didn't ask why I needed a load-responsive relay switch or how I planned to integrate a capacitive discharge unit into a residential outlet. He just grinned and handed me the gear. "Just don't burn the place down," he said, half joking. I didn't plan to. I wasn't out for destruction. This wasn't about vengeance, not really. It was about equilibrium. Karen had created a world where taking was easy and consequences were theoretical. All I was doing was making them real. That night, I waited until the neighborhood was silent. Midnight. Her porch light was off. The scooter was parked as usual, the charger snaked into the same outlet, blinking red this time. Low battery. Perfect. I stepped outside, tools in hand, hoodie drawn low. The breaker box was on the side of the house, just between our units. I opened it carefully, silently. I'd memorized the wiring layout. The shared outlet was on a separate 15-amp circuit. Old, brittle, but isolated. Perfect for what I had in mind. The relay switch snapped into place smoothly. The extra wiring tucked neatly behind the paneling, invisible to any casual glance. I wired the modified capacitor to trip a discharge spike if the load exceeded a set limit. Enough to jolt the charger, enough to scare the hell out of anyone using it, but not enough to damage the grid. I closed the box. Locked it. Then I waited. The next morning, I was up before the sun, sipping coffee like a man about to watch the first act of a play he wrote himself. From my window, I had a clear view of Karen's porch. She shuffled outside around 7:30, yawning, dragging her scooter out by the handlebars. I saw her glance at the plug. Saw the familiar flick of her wrist as she shoved it in. Nothing happened. Then a buzz. A flicker. And suddenly, Piopi. A sharp crack like a firecracker going off inside a tin can. The scooter's display blinked wildly. Sparks danced from the outlet like tiny, frantic fireflies. Karen yelped and stumbled back, one slipper flying off as she tripped over her own doormat. From where I stood, it was beautiful. Like watching a liar get caught in 4K. I opened the window slowly, pretending to yawn. "Everything all right?" I called out, voice full of faux concern. Karen was already on her knees, inspecting the charger, muttering under her breath. "This thing nearly killed me," she barked, glaring at the outlet like it had betrayed her. "Probably overloaded," I said, keeping my face neutral. "That outlet's not meant for heavy loads." "I told you." She shot me a look, part anger, part suspicion, but said nothing. Instead, she unplugged the charger and stormed inside, dragging the scooter behind her like a sulking toddler. That day she didn't post. Not a word. Not a meme. Not a smug caption. And I savored it. But I wasn't done. 2 days passed. No scooter on the porch. No charger plugged in. I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd gotten the message. Then came Friday. I returned from a grocery run to see it. The scooter. Plugged in again. Same outlet. Different charger. I stared at it, incredulous. She doubled down. Only this time, it was worse. I walked inside and felt it immediately, an unnatural heat in the wall. A surge. My system flickered again. Not enough to crash it this time, but enough to throw warning lights across my UPS monitor. I stared at the blinking alerts, fury rising in my throat. So, she hadn't just ignored the first warning. She'd replaced her charger with a faster one. A stronger one. And she was back to drawing blood. She thought the spark was a fluke. That I had no control. It was time to show her I did. That night I adjusted the trap. Increased the discharge threshold. Enough to make it theatrical. Enough to make it memorable. Just after sunrise the next morning I was ready. I waited in my usual spot, coffee in hand, heart thudding. Karen waddled outside, still in her sleep shirt, charger in hand. She plugged it in. 5 seconds passed. 10. Then, boom. A thunderclap of sparks erupted from the outlet, followed by a high-pitched whine. The scooter's LED screen blinked red, then blue, then went dead. Karen screamed and leapt back, arms flailing, nearly tumbling into her hedge. This time the chaos didn't end there. A cascade effect. Her porch light flickered wildly. A breaker must have flipped inside her unit because seconds later her living room lights dimmed, then died. And then, silence. I strolled outside casually, a bag of trash in hand, timing it just right. She was kicking at the scooter in rage. "Everything okay?" I asked, barely masking my grin. "You," she pointed, face red. "You did this. You rigged the outlet or something. This thing's toast." I raised an eyebrow. "Me? I haven't touched anything. Maybe your new charger wasn't compatible. Or maybe, you just shouldn't use someone else's power without permission." She opened her mouth, then closed it. The neighbors were starting to peek out, Mrs. Wexler from behind her curtains, the guy across the street watering his lawn. Karen noticed them too. "You're a freak," she hissed. "This isn't over." But it was already slipping out of her hands. Because I wasn't just fighting her anymore. Now she had witnesses. And the stage was set for her final act. The following morning the neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's scooter, her pride and joy, sat lifeless on her porch, its charger discarded at her feet like a broken toy. I had no doubt she was seething behind her closed curtains. The word was already out. People had seen the sparks, heard her scream. I didn't need to lift a finger to spread the word. Karen had done all the heavy lifting herself. She'd made a spectacle of her own failure. The tension between us was palpable, electric in its own way. She had become more than just an annoying neighbor to me. She was the embodiment of entitlement, someone who thought the world owed her everything, someone who could take and take without consequence. But I had finally forced her to reckon with the reality that there were limits. Limits I was willing to enforce, even if she couldn't see them yet. I spent the next few days laying low, letting her stew. She didn't come outside much, and when she did, she kept her distance. The neighborhood had taken its side. No one was openly siding with me, but the whispers were enough to make her feel isolated. I could tell it was starting to gnaw at her. Her usual passive-aggressive social media posts had turned into desperate rants, but none of her usual bravado was there. She was a wounded animal, lashing out but never truly making contact. Then one afternoon I came home to find a surprise waiting for me. The first thing I noticed was the red violation notice stuck to my door. My heart skipped a beat and a tightness coiled in my chest. I pulled it off and read it quickly. A formal complaint had been filed with the city for unlawful tampering with shared property and disrupting residential services. It was from Karen. Of course. I couldn't help but smile to myself. She hadn't learned a thing. Her retaliation was the same as always, brash, knee-jerk. But it was also her downfall. She had taken her grievance straight to the landlord, hoping to use authority to bend me into submission. It was the exact play I had been expecting. It was also the last mistake she would make. I'd already prepared for this. In fact, I had a counterattack in mind, one that would expose her to the entire neighborhood. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. All I needed was the right moment to turn the tables. That moment came 3 days later. It started like any other morning. I was getting ready for a meeting when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find 2 city inspectors standing on the porch. Both looked official, their badges hanging from their belts. One of them was holding a clipboard. "Mr. Jake Langley?" the older one asked. His voice was dry, the kind of voice you'd expect from someone who had dealt with more than their fair share of complaints. "That's me," I said, bracing myself. "How can I help you?" "We've received a complaint about unauthorized electrical modifications to the property," the younger one said, looking down at his clipboard. "Is it true you've been tampering with shared outlets?" I nodded. "It's true," I said. "I made some adjustments to the wiring after my neighbor, Miss Karen, kept overloading the circuits and causing power surges that were affecting my equipment. I didn't tamper with anything in a dangerous way though, just some modifications to prevent overloading." They exchanged a glance. I could tell they were skeptical. But I had anticipated this moment and I was ready. "I've got documents and photographs to back up everything I've done," I continued. "I'd be happy to show you." The older inspector cleared his throat. We'll need to take a look at the wiring. We'll also need to speak to Miss Karen about this. I'm sure she'll be happy to explain her side of things, I said, my tone dripping with just the right amount of innocence. But I think you'll find that I didn't make any changes that would put the property at risk. They followed me to the breaker box. As I opened it, the younger inspector immediately began inspecting the wires, nodding to himself. I kept my cool, but in the back of my mind I was already thinking ahead. I had planted the seeds for this moment. I knew Karen would try to turn the situation into a legal battle, but I also knew I had evidence on my side. When they finished inspecting the box, they turned to me. We'll need to take a look at the outlet in question on Miss Karen's side, the older inspector said, a touch of uncertainty in his voice. He probably didn't want to get involved in some petty neighborhood drama. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I'd be glad to walk you over there, I said. I stepped outside, leading them across the yard. When we reached Karen's porch, I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. Perhaps she's out, I said, feigning disappointment. But you're welcome to inspect the outlet anyway. The inspectors seemed hesitant, but the older one finally gave a small nod, and they both followed me over to the outlet. As I unscrewed the cover plate, I deliberately shifted the angle so the inspectors could see the custom wiring I'd installed. A slight modification, perfectly legal, perfectly safe. I watched their expressions carefully. They were impressed, though they wouldn't say so outright. I waited. Then, as I was about to finish the inspection, Karen's voice sliced through the quiet air. She'd been watching from the window, no doubt seething. "What are you doing?" she shouted, stepping outside in a huff, hands on her hips. "What is this? You can't." "Actually, Karen," I cut her off, my voice firm, "I've been making the necessary modifications to protect my equipment and keep the power grid stable. I'm sure you'll agree that's more than reasonable, considering the damage your scooter caused." Karen froze, her face turning an alarming shade of crimson. The inspectors looked from her to me, the realization sinking in. They turned to Karen. "We'll need to speak with you inside," the older one said, his tone turning cold. Karen's smug expression faltered, just for a moment, before she narrowed her eyes. The tension in the air was thick, suffocating. I had done it. I had turned the tables, exposed her lies, and made her the villain in front of the one group of people she couldn't manipulate. The inspectors followed her inside, but I didn't stick around. I didn't need to. I walked back across the yard, my heart thumping in my chest. I had won. Later that evening, my phone buzzed with notifications. First, the neighborhood Facebook group erupted. One post after another, people sharing their opinions, taking sides. Karen had been exposed, her arrogance, her dishonesty, laid bare for all to see. The comments were brutal, far more ruthless than I ever could have been. And I knew without a doubt that I had made the right choice. Because sometimes you don't just fight for yourself. You fight for justice. And justice, I thought, had never tasted so sweet.